I want him to suffer like he made my baby suffer. I want him to hurt. I don't want it to be easy for him. I want him to suffer. He needs to suffer.
Such a sad story here. She was the mother, shot and killed 2 days after giving birth to her newborn daughter, Kennedi Hoyle.
This is the story of how hope turned to horror, of innocence betrayed, of a life extinguished before it ever truly began. The story of Brandon Isabelle, Danielle Hoyle and baby Kennedi Hoyle. This is Fatal Whispers. Tonight you will hear how a young mother's excitement for the future ended in a flurry of gunfire and lies. How a newborn's first touch of the world lasted mere hours. And how one man's refusal to accept responsibility unleashed a chain of violence no one saw coming. Imagine the moment, the expectant mother imagining lullabies, first steps, tiny fingers wrapped around her own. Picture the father, smiling as he held the baby, planning the future. But something went horribly wrong. A meeting by the river. A gunshot. A car seat abandoned in a dumpster. And a tiny hat found by the riverbank as winter's current carried the truth away into cold waters. There was no struggle, no screams captured in time. Only footprints fading into the darkness, a small body lost to the river, and an entire community left asking, why? By the end of this story you will wonder not just how this could happen, but how we could miss the warning signs. Before the tragedy, there was love, or at least something that looked like it. Danielle Hoyle was the kind of woman everyone described as gentle. Soft-spoken, dependable, devoted to her family. Her friends called her Danny, a young mother-to-be glowing with excitement as she prepared for her daughter's arrival. She wasn't rich, and she didn't need to be. All she ever wanted was stability, a quiet home, a healthy baby, and a fresh start. Those who knew her say she was thrilled when she learned she was pregnant. It wasn't easy, she worked hard, took care of herself, and counted down the days until she could hold her baby in her arms. Her Facebook posts were full of smiles, baby clothes, ultrasound photos, the kind of small joys that make up the world of a new mother. But behind those smiles, a darker story was brewing. Her boyfriend, Brandon Isabelle, was the baby's father, a young man in his early 20s from Memphis. On the surface, he was quiet and ordinary. But there was something distant in him, a tension that those closest to him couldn't quite explain. He wasn't ready, not for fatherhood, not for the responsibility that came with it. He was drifting, between jobs, between relationships, between purpose. When Danielle told him she was keeping the baby, it didn't spark joy. It sparked resentment. Friends would later recall that he seemed off, uninterested, even irritated when the pregnancy came up. Danielle brushed it aside, convincing herself he was just nervous, that fatherhood would change him. That once he held his baby, he'd see what she saw, a future. But time would prove her hope was misplaced. When baby Kennedi Isabelle Hoyle was born on February 20, 2022, Danielle was ecstatic. She posted messages of joy, telling friends she couldn't wait to take her home. Kennedi was tiny, barely 7 pounds, wrapped in a pink blanket, her name stitched into a little cap. To Danielle, she was perfect. The world felt new again. In those first 48 hours, she took photos, sent texts to friends, and spoke about sleepless nights and diaper changes. Her world revolved around her daughter. She was supposed to take Kennedi for a routine checkup, then meet family members afterward. Instead, she called Brandon. Police would later learn that phone call was the last time anyone heard Danielle's voice. She told friends she planned to meet the baby's father that night, that he wanted to see his daughter for the first time. It sounded innocent enough. She had no reason to fear him. But when she didn't show up to her mother's house afterward, calls went unanswered. By midnight, her phone went dark. Her mother began to worry. Danielle had never gone silent before, not with a newborn, not in the dead of night. When she called again, the call went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. Brandon Isabelle, on the other hand, was calm. Coldly calm. He told no one where he'd been that night. No one saw him panic. But his silence would soon become the loudest scream of all. What happened between a young mother and the man who helped bring life into the world would soon unravel into an act of cruelty few could comprehend. And in the heart of Memphis, a city already worn down by loss and violence, this case would shake even the most hardened detectives. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It creeps in, through uneasy phone calls, sidelong glances, and the kind of silence that feels heavy even through a text message. For Danielle, the warning signs had been whispering for months. But love, or maybe hope, has a way of muting the noise until it's too late to listen. Brandon had grown colder as her belly grew rounder. What began as mild detachment turned into something darker, dismissive comments, angry sighs, and long stretches of absence. When Danielle spoke about the baby, he'd changed the subject. When she mentioned doctor appointments, he stopped answering his phone. He told friends he wasn't ready to be a father. That the timing was wrong. That he never asked for this. It was the kind of talk people brush off, the grumbling of a scared young man. But to those who paid attention, there was something more. A bitterness. A weight behind his words that made them linger longer than they should. Danielle tried to reassure him. She'd say things like, "You'll come around," or, "It'll make sense once you see her." She didn't know she was trying to soothe a storm. Her friends noticed her messages changing. The exclamation points faded. The updates about baby clothes and nursery colors slowed down. And in their place came uncertainty. Shorter texts. Longer silences. She stopped mentioning Brandon altogether. One friend recalled that Danielle seemed tired, not physically, but emotionally drained. Still, she pressed forward. The baby was almost here, and Danielle wasn't going to let anything steal that moment from her. When the due date arrived, she went to the hospital alone. Brandon wasn't there. He didn't call. He didn't text. He knew the baby was being born, and yet he stayed away. To Danielle, it was painful. But she refused to let it break her. She told nurses she was fine, that her family would help. And for a brief time, they did. Her mother and relatives surrounded her with love. But then came the message. A text, or maybe a call, depending on which report you read, from Brandon. He wanted to see the baby. He said he wanted to make things right. Danielle's mother would later say she didn't like it, that something in her gut told her not to let Danielle go. But her daughter brushed it off. She wanted to believe that maybe, finally, he was ready to be a father. That night, Danielle packed baby Kennedi into her car seat and drove off to meet him. A cold Memphis evening, February wind cutting through the quiet streets. She texted a friend that she'd be right back. She never was. Later, police would learn that Brandon had been stewing in silence for days. He was angry about money. Angry about the baby. Angry that his life was changing in ways he couldn't control. Investigators believe he'd already made up his mind by the time he asked to see them. No one knew that the same hands that helped create that child would soon throw her away. No one knew that the man Danielle trusted, even after everything, was about to become the monster she never saw coming. And as her car rolled toward the edge of Sedgwick Street, under the dim glow of streetlights, she drove straight into a trap. The red flags had been there all along, ignored, dismissed, buried beneath the hope that love might save them. But by the time the truth surfaced, it would already be too late. The night air over Memphis was bitter and still, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. The city had gone to sleep, but somewhere near the industrial edge of Sedgwick Street, a new mother was driving toward what she believed was a chance to make peace. Inside her car, the heater hummed low. The radio played faintly, something soft, a brief comfort against the cold. Baby Kennedi slept in her car seat, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Danielle Hoyle, barely 2 days into motherhood, didn't know she was being led to her own execution. She parked near the agreed spot, a quiet stretch near East Levi Road, dimly lit by the occasional flicker of a street lamp. Brandon was already there. He stepped out of his car, his hands deep in his pockets. There was no warmth in his eyes, no smile, no greeting. Danielle didn't see the weapon hidden in his coat. She couldn't have imagined that the man she once loved, the father of her newborn, was about to erase both of them from existence. The next moments remained known only through his later confession. There were no witnesses. No cameras. No sound except the echo of a gunshot splitting the dark. One shot. Then silence. Danielle fell where she stood, her body collapsing beside the car she'd driven with hope in her heart. The impact shattered the driver's window. The diaper bag tumbled from the seat. The baby, still sleeping, was suddenly alone in the world. Brandon stood there, watching. In that instant, any trace of humanity that might have lingered in him was gone. He looked down at the newborn, his own blood, wrapped in a pink blanket, and saw not life, but liability. Not family, but burden. He drove away with her, into the shadows that stretched toward the Mississippi River. It was after midnight when he stopped on a bridge just outside the city, where the water moved black and soundless beneath him. He told police later that he paused, that he thought about what he was about to do. But if he did hesitate, it wasn't for long. He opened the door, stepped out into the cold wind, and walked to the edge. Then he did the unthinkable. He threw his 2-day-old daughter into the Mississippi River. The tiny bundle disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by water and current. No cry. No sound. Only ripples that quickly smoothed into nothing. When investigators later retraced his steps, they found remnants, a car seat discarded in a dumpster, a blood stain in the car, and a baby blanket drifting near the shore miles downstream. Brandon drove home as though nothing had happened. He didn't call for help. He didn't bury her. He didn't even pretend to grieve. In the hours that followed, he texted no one. He made no attempt to hide. It was as if the weight of what he'd done hadn't yet settled, or worse, that it never would. The next morning, Danielle's mother, frantic and sleepless, called police to report her daughter missing. She told them Danielle had gone to meet the baby's father. She told them about the last text message she'd sent. When officers arrived at the scene, they found the silver Chevy Cruze still running. The driver's door open. The diaper bag half buried in the mud. And just a few feet away, Danielle's body. Shot once in the head. There was no sign of baby Kennedi. Only the faint imprint of a car seat in the back seat and a missing blanket told them she'd been there at all. At that moment, police didn't yet know they weren't searching for a missing child. They were searching for a ghost. By sunrise, what began as a missing persons call had become a citywide search. Detectives cordoned off the scene at Sedgwick Street, marking shell casings, photographing footprints, and peering into the half-frozen ditch where Danielle's body lay. The frost had begun to form on the edges of her hair. She was still wearing the same clothes she'd left home in, the outfit she'd chosen to introduce her baby's father to their child. But baby Kennedi was gone. The discovery hit Memphis like a thunderclap. A young mother, murdered. A newborn missing. A community terrified. Police issued an Amber Alert, flashing Kennedi's name and face across every phone in Tennessee. The description was brief but desperate. 2-day-old female, last seen with her mother, Danielle Hoyle, now deceased. Believed to be in danger. Officers fanned out across neighborhoods, scouring dumpsters, drainage ditches, parking lots. Helicopters circled above the river. Divers prepared for a search they hoped wouldn't be necessary. Meanwhile, detectives began their questioning. The first name that surfaced was the most obvious, Brandon Isabelle, the baby's father, Danielle's boyfriend. When officers knocked on his door, he answered without hesitation. Calm. Blank. He asked what was wrong, even though news of the Amber Alert was everywhere. Detectives noticed something immediately, his demeanor. There was no panic, no confusion, just a quiet indifference that chilled the air around him. They asked where he'd been the night before. He said he didn't know. They asked when he last saw Danielle. He said, "It's been a while." They asked about the baby. He said, "She's fine." That was the moment detectives knew something was off. Brandon was taken in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He insisted he hadn't seen Danielle that night. But as hours passed and evidence mounted, his story began to unravel. Detectives had already pulled surveillance footage showing his car following Danielle's. They'd found his phone pinging from towers near the crime scene, and later, from the bridge over the Mississippi River. The evidence was closing in. Under pressure, his calm cracked. And in a moment of cold detachment, he confessed. According to the official affidavit, Brandon told investigators he'd shot Danielle Hoyle and thrown their newborn daughter into the Mississippi River, because he didn't want to pay child support. Even seasoned officers fell silent when they heard it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't an accident. It was premeditated. He said he'd shot Danielle in the head while she sat in her car, then drove off with the baby. He stopped on a bridge, stepped into the cold night, and let the infant slip from his hands into the black current below. He even tried to hide the evidence. He dumped the car seat in a trash bin, discarded the blanket, and drove home as though nothing had happened. Investigators immediately began an extensive river search. Boats combed the Mississippi for days, but the current was unforgiving, deep, wide, and relentless. Despite every effort, baby Kennedi's body was never recovered. The confession spread through Memphis like wildfire. News outlets carried the story, and the public's outrage grew by the hour. People gathered near the bridge, leaving pink flowers and teddy bears along the railing. Strangers wept. Parents held their children closer that night. When detectives escorted Brandon from the interrogation room to booking, his expression didn't change. No tears. No fear. No sign of remorse. He'd done the unthinkable, and he didn't seem to care. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, murder in perpetration of aggravated kidnapping, and murder in perpetration of aggravated child abuse, Brandon Isabelle was locked away in the Shelby County Jail. As news cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, he never spoke a word. He only looked forward, silent, expressionless, as if the horror he'd created wasn't his to bear. But Memphis would remember. Every mother, every father, every neighbor who saw that Amber Alert and prayed for a miracle, they would carry that ache. And all the while, the Mississippi River kept its secret. The courtroom was charged with a tension so thick it felt like static in the air. Reporters lined the gallery, cameras flashing at a steady rhythm. The family of Danielle Hoyle sat in stiff chairs, faces drawn tight, hands grasping tissues. Across the aisle, against a backdrop of wood panel walls and gavel's echo, stood Brandon Isabelle, his posture rigid, his gaze distant. He was indicted in September 2022 on 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse and neglect, and aggravated kidnapping, for the deaths of Danielle and their 2-day-old daughter, Kennedi Hoyle. The state laid out a painful narrative, a young mother eager for her future, a newborn barely known, and a man who turned love into violence. The prosecution's evidence was stark. The car abandoned at the scene. The shattered window. The cold river where a baby's body never surfaced. The confession. Isabelle pleaded not guilty, even after the affidavit in which he reportedly admitted to luring Danielle, shooting her, and throwing their child into the river. This plea forced a full trial, one that would examine motive, method, and the mind of a man accused of erasing 2 lives. The court heard testimony from detectives and forensic specialists. Investigators described how Isabelle's phone pinged near the bridge, how surveillance tracked his vehicle, how the river current deepened the tragedy by swallowing the evidence. Each detail piled one on top of another, constructing a mosaic of horror. Witnesses, family members, friends of Danielle, spoke of her excitement, her trust, the last text she sent. They described the fear that Cassandra of normalcy had vanished in a single evening. Throughout the process, Isabelle remained unreadable. When Danielle's mother locked eyes with him in court, she later said she saw no remorse, a cold, blank stare. For the family, the trial was more than legal procedure, it was a desperate search for answers, for acknowledgement of the cruelty inflicted on those they loved. While the exact sentencing date and full outcome remain under the public reporting I uncovered, what is clear is this: Isabelle faced the maximum charges. With 2 counts of first-degree murder and associated felonies, the possibility of life without parole loomed large. The indictment itself signaled that the state believed the crime involved premeditation and aggravated factors. As the judge prepared to deliver the sentence, the courtroom fell silent. In that hush were echoes of 2 lives cut short, a mother with dreams, a newborn yet to live them. The community held its breath, the family held its grief. And the defendant? He stood, alone in the legal storm he had summoned. When the gavel finally fell, it did more than assign decades. It assigned a narrative, a record, that no child should disappear into a river without a trace. No mother should lie abandoned by the side of a road, her future stolen. And no community should ever forget. Still, sentencing alone could not deliver back the lives lost. It could not restore the lullabies unsung or the first steps never taken. It could not recover the body of Kennedi, or erase the memory of Danielle's last drive. And so, the courtroom emptied. Reporters packed up. Flashing lights faded. Outside, the Memphis night pressed on. But inside each heart touched by this case, the ache remained. For justice is not only delivered in verdicts, it echoes in the lives of the living. When the courtroom doors finally closed behind the cameras and the echo of the gavel faded, the silence that followed was deafening. For Danielle's family, justice had come in the form of a sentence, but not peace. Peace would never come. Outside the Shelby County Courthouse, the wind carried the sounds of muffled sobs and camera shutters. Danielle's mother clutched a photo of her daughter and baby Kennedi, 2 smiling faces frozen in a world that had already forgotten their laughter. She whispered, "They deserved more." The Memphis community stood shaken. This wasn't a stranger's crime, it was intimate, domestic, close to home. Neighbors spoke in disbelief, he killed his own child. They struggled to understand how love could twist into something so monstrous. Candlelight vigils were held across the city, hundreds of small flames flickering against the night sky, each representing a heartbeat lost too soon. Balloons bearing baby footprints floated upward into the darkness, vanishing like the lives they honored. At one vigil, Danielle's cousin spoke softly to the crowd, she trusted him. She loved him. And he took everything. Around her, people bowed their heads, some praying, others simply staring into the distance, haunted by the realization that safety can be shattered in a moment. In the weeks that followed, the city's riverfront became a place of mourning. People left flowers near the banks where investigators had searched for Kennedi. Mothers brought their children there, holding them close, whispering silent promises to protect them. Every ripple on the surface seemed to whisper her name, a lullaby the water would carry forever. But even as the world moved on, the pain lingered. Danielle's family struggled to find meaning in the aftermath. Her apartment remained untouched for weeks, the crib still made, tiny clothes folded neatly, baby bottles lined up like they were waiting for a moment that would never come. Her mother couldn't bring herself to move them. "That's all I have left," she said in one interview. The tragedy forced conversations across Memphis about domestic violence, about the unseen warning signs that hide behind smiles and social media posts. Churches, shelters, and advocates began speaking louder, urging anyone in danger to seek help, to see the red flags before it was too late. Danielle's story became more than a headline, it became a haunting reminder of how love can become lethal. For those who followed the case, the question that lingered wasn't just why Brandon Isabelle did it, but how a father could destroy his own blood. Was it rage? Fear? Possession? Or simply the darkness that festers when someone believes that if they can't have control, no one can? In the end, Danielle and Kennedi's names live on, in court documents, in news archives, and in the memories of those who refuse to let them be forgotten. Their story echoes across every mother's prayer and every daughter's dream, a warning whispered from the shadows. Sometimes, danger doesn't come from strangers. It comes from someone who once said, "I love you." And as night falls over Memphis, the city hums with life once again. Cars pass by the same roads Danielle drove that final night. The river keeps flowing, cold, relentless, eternal. Somewhere within its depths lies a story that will never fully surface. Because some crimes don't end with a verdict. They live on, in the echoes of grief, in the hearts that still ask the one question justice can't answer. How can someone do this, to their own? If this story moved you, let their memory live on. Like, share, and subscribe to Fatal Whispers for more stories that remind us, evil doesn't always hide in the dark. Because every whisper tells a story.